strummed the chords of the deeply American fear of big government when he stated, "When the people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty." This fear was addressed by the Anti-Federalists, who believed the Constitution created a government too capable of tyranny. These fears have contributed to the philosophy of our Constitution, persisted throughout our history, and continue to be prevalent today.
The Anti-Federalists recognized the potential for tyranny in the forming American government and distrusted the direction of its development. This distrust stemmed from the British tyranny that the 13 colonies experienced during the Revolution. Such experiences as the Intolerable Acts, passed in 1774 by Parliament, incited outcry from the colonies. Anti-Federalist Richard Henry Lee called these acts a most wicked system for destroying the liberty of America. With this precedent at hand, the Anti-Federalists heavily debated the newly formed Constitution, for they feared that, as Sentinel 16 said, the new Constitution will be like Pandora's box, replete with every evil.
During the ratification debates, the main argument over the Constitution was that it allowed for a dangerous accumulation of power in the federal government. Such phrases as necessary and proper and general welfare under Article 1, Section 8 led many Anti-Federalists to fear that Congress's power was too broad. As expressed by Sentinel 2, the new Constitution vests Congress with such unlimited powers as ought never to be entrusted to any man or any body of men. Indeed, these broad statements have led to legislation that the framers may have never foreseen, such as the National Parks, Minimum Wage, Social Security, and the Affordable Care Act.
However, these specific implied powers have never created the evil that the Anti-Federalists feared. An example of true abuse of implied powers under the Constitution may be seen in President Franklin Roosevelt's Executive Order 9066 that called for Japanese American internment. While the Federalists were correct in giving broad power to ensure progress, the Anti-Federalist fear of abuse of power held equal arguments to the merit.
Many states had established strong identities under the Articles of Confederation, thus leading many Anti-Federalists to believe the new Constitution would strip away state power. An idea expressed by the Pennsylvania's minority dissent, who stated that the Constitution was founded upon the destruction of the self-governments of the states. Although the Constitution was established as supreme law of the land under Article 6, Clause 2, we disagree that states retain yet a shadow of their former power.
The 10th Amendment has allowed states to be, as described by Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, laboratories of democracy. Recently, 9 states have legalized same-sex marriage, leading the Supreme Court to hear on the Defense of Marriage Act and Proposition 8 from California, thus displaying state policy being transferred to the federal level.
Although the Constitution maintains a system of checks and balances that has never truly allowed tyranny to occur, governmental actions have been evaluated throughout history in the spirit of the Anti-Federalist. The right of the people to monitor and check their government, as the Anti-Federalists did during the ratification debates, has ensured the constant vigilance against an overpowerful government, which can be seen in protest movements such as the anti-war campaign during the Vietnam War and the recent rise of the Tea Party in American politics.
Today, the anti-Federalist debates are still alive. As President Barack Obama stated in his second inaugural address, "Through it all, we have never relinquished our skepticism of central authority, and centuries-long debates about the role of government still persist. These debates include the role of technology and its augmentation of government presence. Recently, controversy over the use of drones targeting American citizens overseas has led many to question governmental power, as exemplified in Senator Ron Paul's recent filibuster."
Additionally, private interests today dominate political campaigns, following the decision in Citizens United versus FEC, allowing money to heavily influence campaigns in the form of super PACs. This has led many to fear that Anti-Federalist belief expressed in Sentinel 1 that stated, "If the administrators of every government are actuated by the views of private interests, how is happiness of the community to be the result?"
At the heart of the Anti-Federalist Foundation in opposition to the proposed Constitution was the argument over the proper role of government. As George Washington said, "Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. Like fire, it can both empower and destroy societies, therefore it must be monitored closely and indefinitely." Thank you.
414. To what extent can you identify the ideas of the Anti-Federalists with one or the other party in modern American politics? Why? How?
I would say issue to issue, it's different for each party. Economically, the Anti-Federalists were very agrarian and kind of laissez-faire. Today that can be seen in the Republican Party. And yet the Federalists agreed for more of an industrial kind of superpower federal government that's more democratic today.
However, the anti-federalists believe in states' rights, and the faction of Tea Party members within the Republican Party have advocated for these states' rights, and this has led to legislation to be proposed at the state level, such as voter ID laws, which is something that the federal level would not be proud of.
In contrast, the Anti-Federalists were not necessarily a united party as much as different little groups of people that opposed the Federalist Party because they were more for states and in turn people's power. And in some instances, especially regarding certain social issues, that the Democratic Party can actually be viewed as more sort of progressive on these social issues.
Has federalism worked in today's world, or should we retweak its thinking? It seems like there's just such a definition and a lot of problems between states and federal government. Should we relook at federalism?
I think those slight tensions and problems between states and federal government are what proves that it's still working very well, because it means that they're both still challenging each other for power, and they're both very important players in our governmental system.
And what Lila is expressing is an idea expressed in Federalist 51, in that the states and the national government can be double security on each other. And states can pass progressive legislation, such as Massachusetts did with their healthcare law, which can be then become a federal law, as seen in the Affordable Care Act.
Can you give me aspects of our current federal government that you believe are quote unquote too big, and why you think it's too big?
One aspect of the federal government that we sort of touched on in our testimony is the use of drones to investigate and maybe target American threats, I guess. And this is very highly contested as an expansion of government power that some people view as not okay and some people view as necessary. So this is one instance that the federal government's power is being questioned.
That's not the question. The question is, what aspect of our current federal government do you think is too big, and why do you think it's too big?
I think the aspect of our federal government that's too big is the Department of Homeland Security. And this is because it is basically just an extension of the Department of Defense, in that they have very overlapping jurisdictions. And if you look at the Department of Homeland Security and the bureaucratic organizations that are under it, there are many similarities that can be seen in the Department of Defense. And that just seems to be too much spending.
I would have to say that a branch that has too much power is the military. I think, especially today, there's been a lot of focus on kind of this overseas spending, helping other nations such as Iraq kind of integrate their own military. I think all this spending ultimately can be somewhat wasteful when our own country can't really control its economy. So I think the military today has turned into this kind of permanent military that we're always spending and bringing in these new things that we don't really need.
Actually, in one area at least, I think the government is too small, especially for environmental concerns, where they're not subsidizing new renewable energy sources such as wind power, solar energy, as much as like nuclear power, which has proven to be very dangerous.
And I think that the federal government is too powerful in regards to education. Such programs as the No Child Left Behind Act that were thought to be beneficial, that were implemented, were not always. And I think that states should have more power in regards to education because they can function at a smaller level and address the needs of their students that they can know better.
Wouldn't there be chaos if there were individual state control over levels of education, environmental controls, controlling their borders for commerce in and out, how much money they spent defending, I mean, California's got ocean to the west, but Arizona, Texas, and Louisiana and Georgia, well, Arizona, Texas, have Mexico to the south. I mean, so I guess the big question is, isn't it good to have national standards for things such as education, environmental control, immigration, et cetera, and then if that's true, how can federal government be too big?
I think it's important to have these national standards, as you mentioned, because it would be really detrimental to the country if, say, Southern California's border enforcements were very, very different from the rest of the southern states. However, if states go above and beyond a national standard, they can then serve as laboratories of democracy to better the country as a whole.
And the federal government under Article 6,
Time. Keep going.
Clause 2 is a supremacy clause, and anytime the states violate any national standard or basically create their own policies that kind of skew away from the rest of the nation, the federal government can step in and be the arbiter and be like, set their jurisdiction.